this entrance streamed thousands of visitors to see a parade of plows showing 5,000 years of plow development and a march of machines presenting the highlights of 100 years of threshing and farm power progress. The conquest of hunger began with the invention of the plow. Early man scratched the earth with his crude forked stick, dropped the seed, and trusted he would be rewarded by a harvest. But even the primitive savage learned that to plow better, he needed more power. He found that power in the muscles of his neighbors. He enslaved those weaker than himself and made them beasts of burden. From a tree, he cut a larger forked branch and attached thongs. To this branch he harnessed his conquered slaves. Thus, human power, the muscle and sweat of fellow man, produced the first step forward in plow development. But man was not long in realizing that human power had obvious limitations. Already cattle had been domesticated for meat, so why not harness them to the plow? Thus, the farmer of 5,000 years ago solved his power problems with the ox. In the Egypt of the pharaohs, the straining oxen and the plow with which they broke the soil became the very symbols of the nation's prosperity. But here, progress stopped. Having discovered and applied animal power, man simply called it a day. The year is about 1830. The place, America. The pioneer settlers pouring westward into Illinois, spilling across the Mississippi into Missouri and Iowa, found the richest soil on earth. And they came with the time-worn colonial plows strapped to the sides of their Conestoga wagons. But just when everything looked happiest, calamity struck. The crude colonial plow with wooden moldboard and cast iron share refused to scour in the rich black earth after the original sod was broken. So desperate became the plight of the settlers that some gave up their homesteads and returned to the east. But others refused to surrender. Hopefully they sought a way out, a plow that would scour in prairie soil. A miracle was needed, and it came at Grand Detour, Illinois in 1837. There, Major Leonard Andrus, founder of the settlement, designed a steel plow. The local blacksmith shaped the steel moldboard from a broken saw blade, and Andrus himself made the wooden frame. And the steel moldboard scoured. Here is a replica of the Major Andrus 1837 steel plow. Without it, the Midwest might never have become the breadbasket of the world. The manufacture of steel plows, which began at Grand Detour in 1837, has now continued for more than a century. The next step was to let the plowman ride. 2-wheel and 3-wheel riding models were patented, first of wood, then of steel. One of the most famous was the Little Yankee of 1893. These early plows had slanted wheels, which reduced landside pressure and helped to keep the furrows straight. But the free American farmer soon began to ask for some easy way to lift the plow bottoms out of the ground. His answer came in this half-century-old plow. It is the famous Emerson foot-lift sulky plow, introduced back in 1899. A push on the pedal with the plowman's left foot lifted 1 or 2 bottoms to a clearance of 6 inches. Another pedal lowered the plow back into the ground. Yes, Yes, the old gray mare stopped being what she used to be when early gas tractors began to roll out of farm equipment factories. This is the famous old 2040 model of 1912. The plow is an independent beam tractor plow, one in which each plow bottom lifts separately. It was built to plow the rough, irregular surface of the prairie. At the ends of the field, one bottom lifted at a time, working from front to back, so the headlands would be kept square across, despite the width of the plow and the necessary staggering of the bottoms. With the coming of smaller, lighter tractors, like this 1913 model with a 1225 rating, a different type of tractor plow was needed. The independent beam plow gave way to unit frame plows, such as this 1915 Grand Detour model, from which came a succession of constantly improved plows. Plow development culminated in modern moldboard plows like this Centennial model, introduced in 1936 to celebrate 100 years of steel plow progress. This modern plow has unusual lightness of draft. It employs a unique tiller-type wheel, which practically eliminates landside pressure. It has extra high clearance for turning under heavy cover crops without clogging or delay. The new plows are adapted to many new uses, such as terrace building. They are also ideal for other soil-saving practices, such as contour farming. What a contrast between tillage like this and the work of the forked stick used so long ago. What a contrast even between the modern plow and that first Grand Detour steel plow of 1837. The first threshing method shown is treading. Threshing with the hooves of horses, a slow, laborious method which, for all its crudeness, is still in use in some sections of the world. It is small wonder that the problem of threshing placed a limit on food production for thousands of years, while people went hungry. Besides treading, flailing, the other ancient method, was in common use in pioneer America when Jerome I. Case came to the territory of Wisconsin in 1842. Flailing was woman's work, too, and many a pioneer mother spent long, cold days beating out the grain in a drafty barn. The work was bitterly unrewarding, for even the strongest man could not hope to flail out more than 7 or 8 bushels of wheat a day. And that wasn't the only trouble, for once flailed, the grain had to be winnowed, an equally slow and tedious process. For thousands of years, all mankind was chained to a life of primitive threshing methods and meager rations. History waited to honor the man who could perfect the thresher. Jerome I. Case was a farm boy of 16 in New York State when his father purchased a crude mechanical thresher called the groundhog. It was merely a spike-toothed cylinder in a wooden box. Then, in 1842, as wheat moved west into Wisconsin territory, Case moved with it. After 2 years of experimenting with thresher design, he built a factory at Racine, where he was to develop and build more threshers than any man who ever lived. Here is an old groundhog thresher, such as Jerome I. Case might have built during the 1840s. This particular machine featured a shaker device for separating grain from straw and chaff. The rig took a 3-man crew, including feeder, band cutter, and straw tender. Sometimes the women pitched in and helped with the straw. Average production with the groundhog and shaker ran about 80 bushels a day, far superior to flailing or treading. One of the early threshers with marked improvements was the Case Eclipse of 1869, perhaps the first thresher in history to start separation immediately behind the cylinder. And that undersized portable steam engine which is driving it is perhaps the most famous agricultural steam engine ever built. It's the famous Case Number 1, built in 1869, and still capable of delivering real power. Old Number 1 helped usher in a whole new era of farm power. Steamers were the star performers in what many old-timers consider the most romantic period in all farm history. Their black sides glistening in the sun, their chimneys belching smoke, their whistles signaling across the fields. They were the original Iron Men in agriculture. But there's constant overlapping between machines and methods. Long after steam power was popular, horsepower served on many farms during harvest time. In fact, sweep powers similar to this were sold as late as 1917. Many old-timers remember this gear noise. This thresher was one of the most famous ever used in the wheat fields. It is the Case agitator, first introduced in 1880. Its principle of counterbalancing the grain pan and straw rack is still basic to threshing today. Capacity of this rig was about 1,000 bushels of wheat per day, employing a crew of 15 to 20. Real production for those days, but better things were just ahead. The very peak of farm power perfection was once the kind embodied in this big 65-horsepower steam engine. Long after gas tractors began to sweep the country, machinery companies continued to build and sell steamers, delivering the last barely a decade ago. It took large crews to run the steamers and the threshers they powered. An engineer, 4, 6, or 8 rack wagons, 3 or 4 field pitchers, 2 or 3 grain handlers. And before the days of the self-feeders and wind stackers, it took an additional 2 pitchers, 2 band cutters, and 2 or 3 stackers. Those were the days when farm women competed with one another in feeding the harvest crews as farmers traded help during the threshing season. Companion machines to the later steam engines were all steel threshers. The steel thresher was introduced by Case in 1904. The use of sheet metal soon made wooden threshers obsolete. For the benefit of old-timers in the pageant audience, the steamer ran through its repertoire of whistle signals, just as they were heard on farms everywhere a generation or so ago. The old steam rigs made themselves understood for miles around with their whistle language. Let's listen to some of it. The call to work. Signal to start. Bundle haulers to hurry. Water wagon to hurry. Whistle signal to stop. But steam had to go. Gas tractors gradually succeeded steam because they were faster, smaller, more compact, yet capable of driving the same kind of thresher. The 2040 of 1912 was a revelation in its day. But it wasn't long before its place was taken by an improved gas tractor, which could put out more work on less fuel. This new tractor was the Model L, first introduced in 1929. Contrasted with the 2040, the Model L weighed less than half and cost only half. Yet it did nearly twice the work per day. And it cost much less to operate and maintain. In free America, the best becomes constantly better. Even the famous Model L was supplanted by new and better tractors, and the steel thresher gave way as the combine came into its own. The combine, this miracle machine, harvests and threshes in one operation at modern tractor speeds, handling more grain in a day than pioneer farmers could flail out in 2 months, harvesting many different crops, working cleaner as well as faster. Combines came into general use in the Midwest as far back as the early 20s, when famous prairie models like this were introduced. Today, we have all kinds of combines, tractor-drawn and self-propelled, cutting swaths from 5 to 16 feet in width in all kinds of crops. Here is a hill-type model, especially built to harvest the steep hillsides of the Northwest. With this modern 6-foot machine, shown here in a contoured field, one man can cut and thresh 15 to 30 acres a day, or 300 to 600 bushels per day in 20-bushel wheat. Where straw is saved for feed or bedding, the slicer baler, introduced in 1940, reduces straw handling to a quick machine operation. Now let's lift our eyes and minds for a moment to the amazing significance of the march of machines and parade of plows. We have just witnessed some of the struggles, failures, and triumphs which marked the development of agriculture through 5,000 years. For more than a century, the United States of America has been the productive marvel of the world. From the farms and factories of our land had come an abundance of food and goods such as the world has never seen before. Here, under the Constitution, men were given freedom to invent and to produce machines which could bring forth food in abundance. Here, Americans conquered hunger for themselves and for millions in other parts of the world. Food, farm machinery, and freedom are inseparable, a fundamental truth which we will do well to cherish and to defend.